Subscribe to my YouTube channel right now because you're about to hear a story that'll make your skin crawl. Imagine me, alone in my creaky old house, unrolling a Pilates mat I thought would save my soul, only to unleash something dark, something twisted. My kids? They're clawing at me with accusations. My grandkids are whispering things no child should know. And then there's this stranger who slinks into my life like a shadow with a pulse. It all started with a 20-minute workout, but now I'm wondering if I'll survive the night. Stay tuned, because this is my story, and it's a nightmare. I should have burned that Pilates mat the moment I dragged it out of the attic. It was Trish's, my daughter's, shoved up there years ago after she swore it was cursed. I'd laughed it off back then. Trish always had a flair for drama, but as I unrolled it in my dim living room, the air turned sour, like damp earth and something metallic. The mat was faded, its edges frayed, and a faint stain bloomed in the center, dark as old blood. I told myself it was coffee. It had to be coffee. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your ears. I'd found this Pilates video online, Core Strength for the Fearless, it promised, hosted by some instructor named Kiki, whose smile didn't reach her eyes. I hit play, the screen flickering as her voice crackled through my ancient TV. "Engage your core," she droned, her tone flat, almost hollow. I followed along, like lifts, planks, a move called the 100 that left me gasping like I'd run from something unseen. My joints ached, my breath rasped, but I kept going. That's when the lights flickered. I paused the video, mid-crunch, sweat stinging my eyes. The room felt colder, the shadows longer. A thud echoed from the front porch, heavy, deliberate. I shuffled to the door, peering through the peephole. Trish stood there, her face pale and pinched, clutching my grandson Timmy's hand. His eyes were wide, too wide, fixed on me like he could see through the wood. "Let us in," Trish hissed, her voice sharp as a blade.
"Now."
I fumbled with the lock, heart pounding. "What's wrong?" "I'm doing Pilates." "Pilates?" She shoved past me, dragging Timmy inside. He didn't blink, just stared at the mat unrolled on the floor. "You're messing with things you don't understand, Mom. That mat, it's not right." I wiped my clammy hands on my leggings. "It's just a workout, Trish. You're being ridiculous." She dropped her bag on my couch, the thud echoing like a gunshot. "Ridiculous? You've been acting strange since Dad died. Hold up here, digging through old junk. And now this." She pointed at the mat, her finger trembling. Dad, Gary, hadn't left like I told people. He'd collapsed in the garage 5 years back, clutching that same mat, his face twisted in terror. The coroner called it a heart attack. I'd buried the memory with him, but Trish never let it go. "Get out," I snapped, my voice shaking. "Take your creepy kid and leave." Timmy tilted his head, a slow, unnatural twist. "It's awake now," he whispered, his voice too deep, too old. A chill slithered up my spine. He stepped toward the mat, barefoot, and pressed his small hand against that dark stain. The lights flickered again, off, on, off, and when they steadied, a faint hum pulsed from the mat, low and guttural. "Timmy, stop." I lunged, but Trish grabbed me, her nails digging into my arm. "Don't touch him," she shrieked. "You did this. You woke it up." "Woke what up?" I yanked free, my pulse hammering. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the floorboards. That's when I saw it, a shadow outside the window, tall and jagged, moving closer. Not human, not quite. The doorbell rang, a shrill scream in the chaos. Trish froze. Timmy giggled, a sound like breaking glass. I crept to the door, my breath fogging the peephole. A man stood there, tall, broad, his face obscured by a hood. He carried a toolbox, rusted and dripping with something dark. His head tilted, as if he could sense me watching. "Who's there?" I croaked. The voice slithered through the door, smooth and cold. "Jake, your new neighbor. Heard some noise, thought I'd check in." A pause. "Let me in." Trish whimpered behind me.
"Don't," she begged.
"He's not real." I turned to her, then back to the door. The knob rattled, slow at first, then violent. Timmy clapped his hands, the hum from the mat swelling into a roar. The shadow, Jake, pressed against the glass, his outline warping, stretching. My hand hovered over the lock, trembling. "Open it," Timmy said, his eyes black as pitch. "It wants you to." The mat pulsed beneath my feet, alive, hungry. I stumbled back, Trish's screams drowning in the noise. Whatever I'd started with that 20-minute routine, it wasn't exercise. It was a summoning. And it wasn't done with me yet. I backed away from the door, my heels catching on the edge of that cursed Pilates mat. The rattling knob went still, but the air thickened, heavy with a stench like wet rot and copper. Trish clutched Timmy to her chest, her breath shallow and ragged, while his unblinking eyes stayed locked on me. That hum from the mat, it wasn't just sound anymore. It was a heartbeat, slow and deliberate, thudding through my bones. "Don't let him in," Trish whispered, her voice cracking. "He's not what he seems." "Who's not?" I snapped, though my gut already knew. Jake, or whatever stood outside, wasn't some friendly neighbor with a toolbox. The shadow I'd seen wasn't right. It bent in ways shadows shouldn't, like it was stitched together from something broken. The doorbell rang again, 3 sharp chimes that made the walls tremble. Timmy squirmed free of Trish's grip and toddled toward the mat, his tiny fingers tracing that blood-dark stain. "He's funny," he giggled, and the hum spiked, a jagged screech that clawed at my ears. "Timmy, get away from that." I lunged for him, but my foot slipped, sweat or something slicker, and I crashed to my knees. The mat felt warm under my hands, pulsing like a living thing. I recoiled, scrambling back as Trish yanked Timmy away, her nails leaving red streaks on his arm. "You're doing this," she shrieked, tears streaking her face. "You and that stupid mat. Ever since Dad, you've been... Don't bring Gary into this." I shouted, but the words tasted like ash. Gary's death flashed behind my eyes, his wide, glassy stare. The mat crumpled beneath him, that same stain wet and fresh. I'd shoved it in the attic, told myself it was grief playing tricks. But now I wasn't so sure. A knock thudded against the door. Not the polite tap of a neighbor, but a slow, heavy pound. "Hey!" Jake's voice oozed through the wood, too smooth, too calm. "I don't mean to intrude, but it sounds like you need help in there." "Help?" Trish laughed, a brittle, hysterical sound. "You're the one who needs help, Mom. You've unleashed something." "Shut up, Trish." I staggered to my feet, my knees throbbing. The mat's hum softened, but it was still there, a predator biding its time. I edged toward the window, peering through the gap in the blinds. Jake stood on the porch, hood low, his toolbox dripping that dark, oily sludge onto my welcome mat. He turned his head, slow, deliberate, and I glimpsed his face. Sharp cheekbones, a grin too wide, teeth glinting like they'd been filed to points. His eyes caught the porch light, reflecting it back in a sickly yellow glow. I stumbled back, heart slamming against my ribs. "He's not human," I whispered. "Told you," Trish hissed, clutching Timmy tighter. "We need to leave. Now." But before I could move, the TV flared to life. Kiki's frozen face filled the screen, her Pilates pose abandoned. Her head jerked, a puppet on strings, and her mouth stretched into a smile that split her face ear to ear. "Keep going," she croaked, her voice layered with static and something deeper, something ancient. "You're almost there." The video lurched forward, leg lifts, planks, the 100, but Kiki's movements were wrong. Her limbs bent backward, joints cracking, and her eyes rolled white. The mat pulsed beneath me, matching the rhythm of her twisted routine. I slapped the TV's power button, but it wouldn't die. The screen flickered, and Kiki's voice turned into a chant, low and guttural, words I didn't know but felt in my marrow. Timmy clapped, delighted. "She's pretty. Pretty?" I choked. "She's a monster." Another pound on the door, harder this time. The frame splintered, a hairline crack snaking up the wood. Jake's shadow loomed larger, seeping through the gaps like smoke. "I can fix that," he called, his tone mocking. "Just let me in." Trish grabbed my arm, her grip bruising. We burn it. The mat. It's the only way. Burn it. I stared at her, then at the mat. The stain seemed bigger now, wetter, spreading like ink. In the house? You got a better idea? She snapped. I didn't. But as I reached for the fireplace matches, something scratched inside the walls, a skittering, like claws on plaster. The lights dimmed, then surged, casting jagged shadows that danced across the room. Timmy pointed at the ceiling, grinning. They're here. Who's here? I demanded, but my voice drowned in a new sound, a low growl, rolling from the mat like thunder. The stain pulsed, and for a split second, I swore I saw it ripple, like something was pushing up from underneath. Jake's laughter slithered through the door, sharp and cold. You can't stop it now, he said. It's already begun. I struck the match, the tiny flame trembling in my hand. Trish's eyes were wild, Timmy's too calm. The mat waited, humming its hunger. And I knew, deep down, that whatever I'd started wasn't ending with fire. It was only getting stronger. The match flared in my trembling fingers, a frail flicker against the growing darkness. The Pilates mat sprawled across my living room floor like a predator playing dead, its hum now a steady thrum that rattled the windows. Trish stood behind me, clutching Timmy, her breath hitching as she muttered, Do it, Mom. Burn it before it's too late. But Timmy, he just stared, his lips curling into a smirk that didn't belong on a child's face. I dropped to my knees, the match hovering over the mat's edge. That stain, God, it was moving, swirling like oil in water, and the air above it shimmered, thick with a heat I couldn't explain. I thrust the flame down, expecting the fabric to catch, to blaze up and end this nightmare. But the mat didn't burn. The fire licked at it, sputtered, and died, leaving a wisp of smoke that smelled like charred flesh. What the... I struck another match, desperation clawing at my chest. Same result. The flame winked out, swallowed by the mat's surface. The hum deepened, mocking me, and the stain pulsed faster, tendrils of black snaking outward. It's not working, Trish shrieked, backing toward the couch. Why isn't it working? I don't know. I hurled the matchbox at the mat, useless little sticks scattering across it. That's when the scratching in the walls turned into a chorus, high-pitched, frantic, like a swarm of rats clawing to get out. Or in. Timmy giggled, pointing at the ceiling. They're mad now. His voice was wrong again, layered, like two people speaking at once. I grabbed his arm, yanking him away from Trish. What's wrong with you? I demanded, shaking him. His skin felt cold, clammy, and his eyes, those pitch-black pools, locked on mine. What do you mean, they? He tilted his head, slow and deliberate. The ones who watch. They like your sweat. My stomach lurched. I dropped his arm, stumbling back as Trish lunged for him, sobbing. Stop it, Timmy. Stop talking like that. But he didn't stop. He stepped onto the mat, barefoot, and the hum surged, a wave of sound that knocked a framed photo of Gary off the wall. Glass shattered, and I swear I saw his face in the shards, twisted, screaming. The TV flared again, Kiki's warped figure jerking through her routine, her chant louder now, words slithering into my skull. Give it strength, she rasped. Feed it. Feed it what? I whispered, but I already knew. Sweat dripped from my brow, splattering onto the mat. The stain drank it, growing darker, wetter. My workout, those leg lifts, those planks, it wasn't exercise. It was a ritual. A crash splintered the air. The front door buckled inward, with groaning as Jake's shadow filled the frame. He didn't knock this time. He pushed, slow and relentless, the hinges screaming. You're making it angry, he called, his voice a blade wrapped in velvet. Let me help you fix it. Stay out. I grabbed a lamp, yanking its cord from the wall, and swung it like a bat. The bulb shattered against the door, sparks raining down, but Jake didn't flinch. His head slipped back, revealing that grin, too wide, too sharp, and eyes that glowed like dying embers. Trish screamed, dragging Timmy toward the kitchen. We're leaving.
Come on, Mom.
But my feet wouldn't move. The mat's hum pinned me in place, a weight pressing on my chest. The scratching in the walls erupted into bangs, fists, or claws, pounding from every direction. Plaster dust drifted down, and a crack split the ceiling, jagged as a lightning bolt. Something moved up there, dark, shapeless, skittering across the beams. "Trish, wait." I croaked, but she was already gone, Timmy's eerie laughter trailing behind her. The door gave way with a final groan, and Jake stepped inside, toolbox dripping that black sludge onto my floor. It hissed where it landed, eating through the wood like acid. "Nice place," he said, tilting his head. "Smells like fear." He dropped the toolbox, and it fell open. Rusted tools spilled out, but they weren't tools. Bones, twisted and charred, clattered across the room, some still glistening with wet gristle. I swung the lamp again, aiming for his head, but he caught it midair, his grip iron cold. "You're strong," he said, chuckling. "It likes that." He nodded at the mat, where the stain now covered half its surface, pulsing like a heart. "What is it?" I choked, wrenching the lamp free. "What do you want?" Jake's grin widened, splitting his face until it looked like it might tear. "It's old. Hungry. Been sleeping in that mat since before you were born. Gary woke it up, gave it a taste. Now it's your turn." "Gary?" My knees buckled. "You knew him." "Knew him?" Jake laughed, a sound like breaking bones. "I took him. Fixed him up real nice." He stepped closer, the air around him rippling with that same shimmer I'd seen over the mat. "You're next." The ceiling groaned, and a chunk of plaster crashed down, missing me by inches. Shadows writhed up there, long, thin limbs, too many to count. The mat's hum turned into a roar, and I felt it, something pulling, tugging at my insides, like it wanted to rip me apart and stitch me back together. I bolted for the kitchen, Jake's laughter chasing me, the mat's hunger clawing at my heels. Trish and Timmy were gone, the back door swinging open into the night. But as I reached the threshold, I heard it, a whisper from the mat, soft and insidious. "You can't run." And deep down, I knew it was right. I stumbled through the back door into the night, the cold biting at my skin as the mat's whisper clawed at my mind. "You can't run." The yard stretched out before me, a tangle of overgrown grass and skeletal trees, bathed in a sickly moonlight that made everything look wrong, too sharp, too still. Trish and Timmy were nowhere in sight, their absence a hollow ache in my chest. The house loomed behind me, its windows dark except for the faint glow of the TV, Kiki's twisted chant seeping out like poison. I took a step, then froze. The grass rustled, not wind, not animals, but something low and deliberate, slithering closer. My breath fogged in front of me, and I saw it, shapes, hunched and jagged, peeling away from the shadows of the trees. They didn't move like people. Their limbs bent backward, heads lolling as if strung up by invisible threads. The mat's hum followed me, a heartbeat echoing through the ground, syncing with my own racing pulse. "Trish," I shouted, my voice cracking. "Timmy." No answer, just the rustle growing louder, the shapes closing in. I turned to run, but my foot caught on something, a root, or maybe a hand, and I hit the dirt hard, tasting blood and soil. The air shifted, heavy with that rotten copper stench, and I heard Jake's voice, smooth and taunting, from the doorway. "Leaving so soon?" he called. "It hasn't finished with you." I scrambled up, my hands slick with mud, and saw him leaning against the frame, his grin glinting in the dark. The toolbox lay open at his feet, those grotesque bones twitching like they were trying to crawl free. Behind him, the mat pulsed, its stain now a gaping maw, black and wet, stretching beyond its edges onto the floorboards. "Stay away from me." I grabbed a rock, pathetic, but it was something, and hurled it at him. It sailed wide, thunking against the house, and Jake laughed, a sound that curled into a growl. He stepped forward, slow and deliberate, the grass withering under his boots. "You don't get it, do you?" he said, his eyes flaring that sickly yellow. "It's not me you should be scared of." He pointed back at the mat. "It's been waiting. Gary fed it pain. You're feeding it fear." and it's starving. The shapes in the yard lurched closer, their outlines sharpening. Long, claw-tipped fingers, faces hollowed out, mouths gaping in silent screams. They weren't people, not anymore. One reached for me, its hand brushing my ankle, cold as death, and I kicked free, bolting toward the shed at the yard's edge. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but I didn't stop until I slammed the shed door shut behind me, fumbling for the rusty latch. Inside, it was dark, the air thick with dust and gasoline. I pressed my back to the wall, listening. The rustling stopped, replaced by a low, guttural whine, like a pack of dogs circling prey. Then, a tap on the shed's window. I whipped around, and there was Timmy, his pale face pressed to the glass, eyes black as tar. "Grandma," he whispered, his voice slithering through the cracks. "It wants you to finish." "Finish what?" I croaked, my throat raw. He tapped again, slow and rhythmic, matching the mat's hum. "The workout. It's not done." The window shattered inward, glass sprang across the floor. I screamed, ducking as Timmy climbed through. Not climbed, crawled, his body bending in ways it shouldn't, joints popping like firecrackers. He landed on all fours, head cocked, grinning with too many teeth. "Timmy, no." I grabbed a shovel propped against the wall, swinging it wildly. It caught his shoulder, and he hissed, a sound no child could make, before skittering back into the dark. But he wasn't gone. I heard him out there, giggling, joined by Trish's voice, faint and pleading. "Mom, help me." I dropped the shovel, my hands shaking. Trish was alive, but where? I edged to the broken window, peering out. The yard was a nightmare now, those shapes swarming, circling the house, their claws glinting in the moonlight. Jake stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching like a conductor over a twisted orchestra. And the mat, it was moving, dragging itself across the floor toward the open back door, leaving a trail of that black sludge. A hand grabbed my shoulder, cold, bony, and I spun, shrieking. It was Trish, her face streaked with dirt and tears, her eyes wide with terror. "We have to stop it," she gasped. "Timmy, he's not himself. It's in him." "What's in him?" I gripped her arms, shaking her. "What is it?" She sobbed, pointing at the mat, now halfway across the yard, inching toward us like a slug. "Something old. Something bad. It took Dad, and now it's taking us." The shed door rattled, claws scraping the wood. The hum surged, a roar that shook the walls, and the mat stopped, its stain rippling. A shape rose from it, tall, thin, made of shadow and sinew. It had a mass of writhing tendrils. It turned toward us, eyeless but seeing, and I felt it pull, tugging at my fear, my guilt, my sweat-soaked soul. Trish screamed, and the shapes outside howled, a chorus of hunger. Jake clapped his hands, delighted. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he shouted. "Finish the routine, and it'll let you live. Maybe." But I knew he was lying. That thing didn't want my workout, it wanted me. And as it glided closer, the night baring its teeth, I realized Trish was right. We were running out of time. The shed trembled around us as that shadow thing loomed closer, its tendrils lashing the air like whips. The Pilates mat lay beneath it, a grotesque throne, its stain now a swirling vortex of black that seemed to suck in the moonlight. Trish clung to me, her sobs muffled against my shoulder, while the clawing at the shed door turned into a frenzied pounding. Jake's laughter rang out, sharp and unhinged, cutting through the mat's relentless hum, a sound that burrowed into my skull and refused to let go. "We're dead," Trish whimpered, her nails digging into my arm. "It's going to take us, just like Dad." "No," I growled, shoving her back. "Not yet." My eyes darted around the shed, shovel, rake, a rusty gas can in the corner. Fire hadn't worked before, but desperation was all I had left. I grabbed the can, the slosh of liquid inside a faint hope against the nightmare outside. "What are you doing?" Trish hissed, but I ignored her, kicking the shed door open. The shapes, those twisted, hollow things, surged forward, claws outstretched, but I swung the gas can, splashing fuel across the nearest ones. They shrieked, a sound like tearing metal, and recoiled, their forms sizzling where the gasoline hit. The shadow thing paused, its tendrils quivering, and Jake stepped into the yard, his grin faltering. "Cute," he sneered, "but you can't drown it. It's older than fire." "Maybe," I said, unscrewing the cap, "but I can make it hurt." I hurled the can at the mat, fuel arcing through the air, splattering across that pulsing stain. The shadow thing reared back, its roar shaking the ground, and I struck a match, my last one, praying this time it'd take. The flame caught, a whoosh of orange erupting across the mat. The shadow thing thrashed, tendrils flailing as fire licked up its form, but the mat didn't burn like it should. It writhed, curling in on itself, the stain bubbling like boiling tar. The hum turned into a scream, high and piercing, and the shapes in the yard staggered, clutching their heads. "Mom," Trish grabbed my arm, pulling me back as the flames spread, catching the grass. Jake lunged forward, his eyes blazing yellow, but the fire forced him back, his coat smoldering. "You're only making it stronger," he roared, but his voice cracked, uncertainty creeping in. The shed groaned behind us, with splintering as something crashed through the roof. Timmy, or what was left of him. He landed in the dirt, his body twisted, limbs too long, teeth glinting in a jagged maw. "Finish it," he snarled, his voice a chorus of whispers. "It needs you." I shoved Trish toward the house. "Run." She hesitated, tears streaming, but bolted inside, slamming the back door. I faced Timmy, or the thing wearing his skin, my hands empty, my heart hammering. The fire raged, the mat a writhing mass of flame and shadow. But it wasn't dying. It was changing. The shadow thing melted into the mat, its form collapsing into that swirling stain, and the flames twisted, turning black, unnatural, alive. The hum softened, then surged again, a pulse that knocked me to my knees. Timmy skittered closer, his claws gouging the earth, and I saw it. His eyes weren't black anymore, but hollow, leaking that same black sludge from Jake's toolbox. "Grandma," he crooned, "it's in you too." He pointed at my chest, and I felt it, a cold, sharp tug deep inside, like something had latched onto my core. My Pilates workout, every move, every drop of sweat, had fed it, tied me to it. I clawed at my shirt, gasping, but there was nothing to grab, just that growing ache. Jake circled the fire, his grin back, wider than ever.
"Told you," he said.
"It's yours now. Finish the routine, or it finishes you." The mat's flames flared, and Kiki's voice erupted from nowhere, everywhere, her chant a deafening roar. "Engage your core. Give it all." The TV inside flickered through the window, her warped face screaming the words, her body a tangle of broken limbs. I staggered to my feet, the tug in my chest sharpening into pain. The shapes closed in again, their howls blending with Timmy's laughter. Trisha's scream echoed from the house. She hadn't escaped. None of us had. The mat pulsed, the black fire swirling into a shape, a figure, humanoid but wrong, rising from the stain like a birth. It turned to me, faceless yet familiar, and I saw Gary in its outline, his slump, his hands, twisted into something monstrous. "You," it hissed, voice scraping my soul. "More." I ran, not thinking, not caring, toward the house. The thing followed, slow and inevitable, the mat dragging behind it like a cape, still burning, still alive. Timmy skittered ahead, blocking the door, and Jake flanked me, his laughter a blade in the dark. The tug in my chest yanked hard, and I fell, gasping, as that Gary thing loomed over me. "Finish it," it said, tendrils reaching for my face. "Or we take them all." Trish pounded on the window, trapped. Timmy giggled, claws flexing. Jake clapped, a slow, mocking rhythm. The mat's hum was my heartbeat now, my fear, my everything. I'd started this with a 20-minute routine, thinking I'd strengthen my core. Instead, I'd awakened a curse, one that wouldn't stop until it had me. My family, my soul. The night closed in, and as the thing's tendrils brushed my skin, cold and slick, I realized the truth. There was no ending this. Not with fire, not with running. It was in me, and I was its. The last thing I heard was Kiki's chant, a lullaby from hell. One more rep. And then darkness.